Brian Smith here, and welcome to the Dreampath podcast, where I try to get inside the heads of talented creatives from all over the world. My goal is to demystify and humanize the creative process and make it accessible to everyone. Now let's jump in. What a privilege it was to talk to Alfredo Arreguin. Please forgive me in advance for the long introduction, but it's not often that I interview such a distinguished, accomplished guest with so many awards and accolades. Born in 1935 in Morelia, Michoacan, Mexico, Alfredo became, at age 9, the youngest pupil at the Morelia School of Fine Art. At age 13, he moved to Mexico City, living there for 11 years until he came to the United States in 1959. In our talk on this episode, Alfredo tells us the incredible story of his move to Mexico City and his journey to America. Alfredo eventually moved to Seattle, where he earned BA and MFA degrees from the University of Washington. He has received numerous awards, including a Humanitarian Award by the Washington State Legislature, a Governor's Arts Award from the state of Washington, and a National Endowment for the Arts Visual Artists Fellowship Grant, among others. According to the University of Washington Press, Alfredo's canvases are tapestries that mingle diverse and interpenetrating influences and images. The traditional crafts of his native Michoacan, the lush rainforests of his homeland and of the Pacific Northwest, sacred and endangered animals, gods and totemic figures, icons like Frida Kahlo and Cesar Chavez, and motifs including masks, eyes, and abstractly patterned tiles. Professor Lauro Flores has referred to Alfredo as a genuinely American painter in the real hemispheric sense of this term, an artist of magic, mystery, and revelation whose place in the history of North American art has already been secured. Alfredo Arreguin has exhibited his work internationally, most recently at the Museo de Cadiz in Spain in 2015. He has exhibited solo shows at Linda Hodges Gallery in Seattle since 2001. Arreguin has a long and distinguished list of accomplishments. In 1979, he was selected to represent the U.S. at the 11th International Festival of Painting in France, where he won the Palm of People Award. In 1988, in a competition that involved over 200 portfolios, Arreguin won the commission to design the poster for the centennial celebration of the state of Washington. The image was his painting, Washingtonia. That same year, he was invited to design the White House Easter egg. One of the most crowning achievements came in 1994, when the Smithsonian Institution acquired his 3-panel painting entitled Sueño for inclusion in the collection of the National Museum of American Art. A year later, in 1995, Arreguin received the highest recognition given by the Mexican government to the commitment of distinguished individuals who perform activities that contribute to promote Mexican culture abroad. More recently, he was invited to show his work in the Framing Memory Portraiture Now exhibition at the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery. One of his paintings included in this show will remain in the permanent collection of the gallery. In 2018, he collaborated with Doug Johnson for In the Shadow of the Master in Tacoma and had a solo retrospective at the Bainbridge Island Museum of Art. That same year, Doug Johnson and Lauro Flores edited and published a book entitled Alfredo Arreguin's World of Wonders, Critical Perspectives. In this book are not only samples of his work over the years, but also poems, short stories, and narrative tributes to Alfredo from iconic writers such as Ray Carver and Tess Gallagher, two of my all-time favorite writers. In this episode, Alfredo talks about his close relationship with Ray Carver, leading up to Carver's death in 1988, and his continuing friendship with Tess Gallagher. I had the privilege of seeing some of Alfredo's paintings up close at the Marmot Art Space in Spokane recently. And while I encourage you to go online and check out his work, as with all art involving paintings on canvas, there is no substitute for seeing the work in person. So I encourage you to find Alfredo's paintings at a gallery and check them out. They are something to behold. So without further ado, or in Spanish, sin más preámbulos, please enjoy this intriguing and lively discussion with the great Alfredo Arreguin. We're here with Alfredo Arreguin, and I guess I'll start off with a discussion of the show in Spokane that I saw at the Marmot Art Space. I was there last night looking at your paintings there, and I had seen your paintings in books because of the book that just came out, Alfredo Arreguin's World of Wonders, Critical Perspectives, edited by Laurel Flores and Doug Johnson, and stunning paintings and writings about you in that book. But of course, it does not do your paintings justice to see them on a page. So when I saw them at the Marmot Art Space in Spokane, I was struck by the depth, the 3D. There's two things that struck me. One, some of them almost seemed three-dimensional, taking a 2D image and things were just leaping off of the canvas. The wildlife, but also the depth of the image, so that you're actually seeing far back behind the subjects in the paintings, and so I just wanted to, I guess, comment on how stunning those paintings were in person, and I recommend that anybody who is interested in seeing your work go beyond the books and go outside of the web to actually see them in person.
Well, thank you. You're right. Absolutely. Yeah.
So how did that show in Spokane come about?
Well, Marshall Peterson have already heard about me because I had an exhibition at the Museum of Northwest Art there in Spokane. He's very well connected with people in Spokane because he's lived there most of his life with his mother. I think she has a ranch outside the city. But he was already interested and thought that I will never show there. But he wanted to try it anyway. And he called me up and he says, I have this little tiny gallery and would you like to show here? And I said, sure. And it blew his mind that I was ready to accept without even seeing the space, And so one of the things about that he opened the gallery was because he wants to buy one of those little mini houses that they're building, and around that area. And so when I had my first show there, he saw like 3 or 4 paintings, and he says that made my budget for the whole year, So that's why he insisted that I have another show this summer again, And I agree because I wanted to help him, It's a big contrast from the exhibition that I just had at the Bainbridge Island Museum of Art, because they have a fantastic new museum. It's only 5 years old and real close to the ferry, and they have all these beautiful windows that the light comes in, and it's so spacious. And I had the whole museum to myself, including the lobby, So that was very impressive. The first night for the opening, I had like 500 people, and the last day of before the show closed, I had 600 people there, and I brought a lot of people that usually don't go to museum, people that are very humble and. Some of them came from all the way from Morelia. My sister came from Mexico City with her husband and everything else. My idea is that when I am probably the artist that have shown in the state of Washington more than anybody else. I've shown in every high school and every college and every museum. The only one that I haven't shown is the Seattle Art Museum, For some reason, they haven't invited me to show there. All my friends that graduated at the University of Washington with me have had shows, but they haven't offered me. And I was really bitter around the 60s when I was drinking and stuff. And then I thought, well, maybe I can shoot a little farther. And I end up showing at the Smithsonian, having two of my paintings in their public collections. They even have an installation called The Struggle for Justice, where I'm the only oil painting there. And they have relics from all the struggle that of all people that since the country started there, And so I'm really honored to be there. And of course, they send thousands of students every day to see the exhibits, because Washington, D.C., is an international place where people come from all over the world and they want to see the museums,
Well, I guess take that, Seattle Art Museum. You got into the Smithsonian. So yeah. Well, so how did that happen? How did your paintings wind up in the Smithsonian?
Well, I had first of all, they had the beginning of the Mexican Museum in San Francisco. I read in the paper that, they're opening a Mexican museum in San Francisco. So I contacted the man that started the museum, Peter Rodriguez, who was an artist that always wanted to have a Mexican museum. And so he started the museum in a shoe store. So he called me up and he says, they have a left wing for Chicanos and they also have a right wing for Mexicans. Which wing do you want to show? I said, Peter, I don't know. And actually, it's fine with it. He says, well, how long have you been here? And I said, like 17 years. Then you're a Chicano. And what's funny is there's also some sort of a situation into which isn't this a common thing that happens all over the world, that we are the minorities and we're struggling to be recognized and fighting. But then those same people that form these groups to complain are doing the same thing, Like, for instance, Cheech Marin, you know who he is?
From Cheech and Chong.
Yes. He has been collecting Chicano art all his life. Well, since the Chicano movement started. And so he loved my work. He saw it in an exhibition at the museum in Chicago, but he didn't buy any of my work for his collection because he probably felt that I am not a Chicano. You see, this guy is not a Chicano. He comes from Mexico and he paints landscapes,
Right.
And so anyway, when I had a show in Albuquerque, at the museum in Albuquerque, this man, Andrew Connors, the curator of the show, he called me up and he says, Alfredo, we're having an exhibition of Cheech Marin's Chicano show, but you're not in it. But don't worry about it because you're next and you're going to have the whole gallery for yourself, So anyway, that's how it happens. The Smithsonian saw that show of the when they first moved, the Mexican Museum moved over. I had a traveling show. It started at the Bellevue Art Museum and went around the nation. Ended up at the Smithsonian, one of the shows, and that's when they discovered my work. So they called me up, and this Andrew Connors, and he said, "We'd like to make a visit to your place." And I said, "Wow, please do come over." And he was very humble and wonderful, and we had bean soup here and everything. And he said, "Can you give me some slides of your work to take over to Washington? Because we want to collect one of your pieces." And I said, "Oh, sure." And I sent them a painting of a triptych, 144 inches by 72 inches.
Big one.
Big one. And so he called me up and he says, the director of the museum wants the big piece. I said, wow, really? I couldn't believe it. And so they acquired this piece called Sueño, and it was the fourth most important acquisition. And I was there with O'Keeffe, at the same time they were collecting her. And I thought, man, that's going to really put me in the map,
And it did.
And it did. And so, and when they were celebrating me for acquiring this triptych, I was sitting next to this woman, and she said, I am the director of education of the Smithsonian. I want to ask you a question. What do you think of the National Portrait Gallery? And I said, well, it's a little too white and too gray and a little bit depressing. You need some color here, you know what I mean? And she laughed, and 2 years later she called me up and she said, guess what? Now I am working for the National Portrait Gallery, and I remember what you said. So he says, not only do we want to acquire one of your pieces, but we want to give you a show. And I said, wow, that's great. So during the opening, I'm passing the presidents of the United States, and everything's so great and dark. And I look at the end, and out of the gallery shooting all these pinks and blues and oranges and everything. They had painted the gallery in all these bright colors. And I said, oh no, they took it too literal. But they show me, and they show 5 other artists that we were all minorities, They represented a very famous woman that is Native American from New Mexico, and a very wonderful black artist from New York. And so they got the idea, but they painted my space with all these colors. I was the only one that was shooting the color outside the gallery.
So when did Sueño make it into the Smithsonian? What year was that?
That was like 2004.
Wow.
Yeah, 2004. And I called my father from the Smithsonian, and I said, I'm at the Smithsonian, Papa. And of course he knows. He's very well aware of what the Smithsonian is. I mean, most people around the world know that, know. So he says, you hit the top there, man, and all that. And it was a real nice experience. And it keeps on giving because people, especially one of the reasons that I like the component of education in museums is because they bring all these elementary schools and all these children to see the shows, and I just love that,
Yeah.
I was in Albuquerque. I said to the curator, I said, you know what I want you to do? I have an idea. I said, can you take a photo of my paintings, maybe two paintings, and make them into line drawing paintings to give them to the kids to color.
Oh, like a coloring book.
Yeah. Well, they were posters. And so when I went to the opening, there were like 300 kids outside the museum coloring these books, these prints, you know. That's what makes me really happy, So also, I have also, because there are a lot of museums that do not have any money to buy my work, I've been donating my work to these museums. And that's what I have, 3 pieces and 4 pieces in both Mexican museums. The museum in Stockton, California, I donated one to them. The one that it was really hard to donate was the one in Albuquerque Cultural Center, because they called me up and he said, Senora Arreguín, your painting is attracting so many people from all over. And here we're very dry, and your salmon, they make people feel so good. Can you donate this painting? I said, it took me 8 months to paint. It's a huge painting, and you wanted me to donate it to you? Okay, I will. You can have it,
8 months?
Yeah. Oh, it's a real big painting. It's called Chihuahua because I like to give Native American names to the Colombia is called Chihuahua. So that's what I call it. And I was there 2 years ago visiting my daughter, so they gave me a tour of the museum. And I'm walking, and then all of a sudden, and there is your painting, Mr. Arreguin. I said, you're absolutely right. It is my painting because I never signed any documents. And the guy goes, what? What? Just a second. And she went and called the director on Sunday. It was a Sunday. And so he called the she was over there in 20 minutes trying to do the documents for me to sign away the painting because they have forgotten to give me the deed,
So what's your process? If you're working on a painting for 8 months, is that the only painting that you're working on, or do you have multiple canvases up and working on those simultaneously?
Yeah, no, not usually. Sometimes because I use pattern as a background, and it's sometimes it puts me to sleep to repeat over and over and over. There's one point into which I'm meditating, and then passing that I'm sleeping, and so that the reason those paint well. When you go downstairs, I'm going to show you that diptych that I'm working on.
Oh, the orcas?
The orcas, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And you could see that process, how I have a billion little dots in there that I paint every day, So it's very time consuming. And I work with little brushes to do line drawing. To do the designs.
Can we go down right now with the mics? And
sure.
You could hold on to the microphone, and then I think that might be interesting.
Okay.
Okay, so we're going downstairs in Alfredo's Seattle home, undisclosed location in Seattle. Wow.
Now you can see all the little dots that I have here, all the pixels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is, I took some painting classes in college, and I have a very cursory understanding of painting styles, and I wouldn't call this pointillism.
It's very close to it.
Yeah. But it is similar to pointillism, it looks like.
You could. Everything comes. Like when I was in Korea, and then I had my R&R in Japan. I was fascinating. I'm fascinated by their art and their music and everything else. And then I end up painting salmon paintings with hokusai waves,
Yeah.
Then I go to Mexico and visit Mexico, and all of a sudden the music and the atmosphere starts because it's not something that you say with your mind. You don't say, I'm gonna do a painting with a monkey in this jungle, and I'm gonna do this over here. It's sort of like usually is going to be the medium, and to all these things filter out and go through the brush into the canvas,
Yeah.
you know. And if you start thinking about it, it breaks the flow.
Right.
Because you're sort of in a meditative state. And that's one of the reasons that I have never understood or liked the idea of conceptual art, because it's brain art and mine is soul art. And when I do portraits, now I'm doing portraits of two more justices. I did the first one with what was his name was Smith, the first black justice in the state of Washington, and I said to because Steve Gonzalez came over and asked me. He says, my son was at the palace of the justices, and he says, and he saw those portraits and said, Dad, how come we don't have people that look like us? So I'm here to ask you to see if you do a portrait of this Justice Smith. And I said, well, you know, I do portraits of Frida, but she's dead and she doesn't complain. But to do portraits of living people is very hard for me because of their egos, you know?
Right.
But anyway, I have this idea that if I absorb and talk to you for a while, it's going to come that something in your features or something about you made an impression. Not consciously, I'm not, because if I start doing a drawing of you, it wouldn't look like you. But if I have some feature of you that is important to you, you recognize it as your portrait. Besides that, I said to you, for instance, if you wanted your portrait, I said to you, I'm not going to paint your portrait. We're going to paint your portrait. I want you to tell me what's important in your life. Is it a poem that is in your mind, a movie, or what, or a childhood dream, or what something that comes to you that is part of you? And then I use that as pattern. So, of course, the judges love his portrait because he had all of his children, all the people that he admired, all his mentors, everything wasn't there, you know. So it was the background becomes part of him, you know. And then he identifies with the painting so much because all of a sudden it's not your ego that starts saying, he painted me too old and I don't have that wrinkle over there. Yeah. It's the connection that you make with the painting that is what creates an emotional connection that is really important, you know.
Well, I've heard it described, and I forget the famous painter who used to paint like chairs and tables and things like that. You know, what's the difference between painting a chair and a picture of a chair that just a snapshot? And someone described it as the painter can stare at the chair for weeks before they actually capture the essence of the chair.
Yeah.
And is that kind of what you're talking about with portraits, that you're really going for the essence of who that person is?
Yeah, I did try. I tried. That's why it will be difficult for me to do a portrait of somebody I don't know if that sends me a picture. You know? But like the ones that are dead, heroes that are dead, like Zapata, I get away with it because I make his song and his horse and everything else to adorn him, into which people immediately identify him with all this other stuff, you know. Because after all, you know, how do we know what Jesus Christ looks like? Somebody paints him blonde, somebody paints him black.
Yeah.
It's just an illusion. But if you put a halo on anybody, then all of a sudden it has some spiritual connotation with it, you know.
Yeah. So what do we... just because we're on audio here, we have no video. I'm going to try to describe what I'm looking at, and maybe you could help us understand it better, what you're painting here. We're in the basement of Alfredo's home, and this is his studio, apparently. There are two canvases that are glued together.
No, they're just clamped.
Oh, they're clamped together.
They're clamped.
And the size of these canvases is what?
It's 60 by 96 inches wide.
Okay. And we're looking at, I mean, this is just stunning. Hopefully we can get one of these pictures on the website. But there are orca whales jumping or, breaching the surface of the Puget Sound. And those is that the Olympic Peninsula in the background?
The Salish Sea.
Oh, okay.
See, the mountains, this is sort of a silhouette of Mount Rainier, and the other mountains, they're just invented by me.
Okay.
I just want to create a feeling, like I keep on saying, if I was very accurate describing Mount Rainier, then there is nothing much to say about it. But if it has some ambiguity with it, it makes you wonder about things. Because, people that look at paintings, they spend a few seconds going through the museum. They just walk by and pass them. But with mine, they stop quite a lot because there's a lot of little ghostly things in it, a lot of mysteries that you cannot see. So some people sometimes come 2-3 times to see the show,
right? So
they can see more,
And that's another thing I wanted to point out with these paintings that I saw at the Spokane Gallery, and in this painting that's in progress right now, the Orcas painting, is there's so many layers and so much to see in it. I don't know. I don't want to call it complex, but you definitely cannot absorb what is on the canvas just walking by it. I mean, there's a lot there to take in, and it's just it's an experience for sure. Just to try to appreciate everything that's on the canvas. So what we're looking at here, how many weeks into it are you?
Oh, this about 6 weeks. Yeah. And I'm still working on it. But what is interesting is that it will be kind of corny to think that I read the paper and the orcas are making news lately about their extinction or something. And then all of a sudden, I'm going to paint a painting of orcas, But I've been painting salmon and orcas for quite a while. Actually, my first painting of salmon was when Ray Carver came to one of my openings at Foster White, and the first exhibition he's ever been to. And then he went to Syracuse, and a week later he called me and he said, I have cancer all over my lungs, and I'm sorry that I said I was crying. He says, no, I'm coming to Seattle, and they're going to cure me. I have a specialist. And I will go and wait for him at the hospital where he was having chemotherapy. And all of a sudden, this big, large man gets into my car and starts hugging me and says, I wish I was fishing. And I thought, I'm going to give him a painting of a jungle. And then I said, no, I'm going to give him a painting of salmon. And that's my first salmon painting I did, It's called The Hero's Journey. And it just blew his mind. When people from New York will come to interview him, he will say, sit here and meditate on this painting. And on top of the painting had the the ghost fish. Oh, I love the ghost fish on top, And so that's when I started painting. All of a sudden, Hokusai came to mind with the big wave and the salmon. And then I started a genre of paintings of salmon and the waves, which saved me completely economically, because then all these billionaires were collecting my salmon paintings, but they were not collecting my jungle paintings.
So Ray Carver was, I think he died in 89?
Yes.
And so his diagnosis was about 88 or so?
Yeah, it was like a year. Yeah.
And just for the audience who may not know Ray Carver's work, he's one of the most famous short story writers from the 80s. And just remarkable, a big influence on me because I studied him. I went to the same college as Ray Carver attended, and I think he may have even flunked out of YVC.
Oh, wow.
But I don't want to disparage him by saying that, but I think I remember hearing a rumor that he maybe didn't do so well at YVC, but he ended up writing some amazing short stories that actually made their way onto film in the movie Shortcuts, directed by Robert Altman.
And Birdman, the latest one.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Tess was over there receiving was invited by Alejandro Iñárritu for the Oscars and all that. So she was in heaven in Hollywood with him, made real good friends, which they still write each other. And they asked me for the movie if I would let them have a photograph that Susie took of Tess, Ray, and I outside on the porch. And also one of the portraits I did of Ray, they did it on poster size. And we went to see the movie and I couldn't find it. And all of a sudden, we had to see it again. And there it was stuck between the sofa and the dressing room of the guy, and a little portrait of the three of us way back there. You could, at the end, I am with my wife saying, maybe they gave us some credits, and my daughter's with me, and the whole theater has left, and here are the recognitions, and it's going real slow, and they're also at the end. Thank you to Tess Gallagher and Alfredo Arreguin for blah, blah, blah. So it was really nice.
In the credits for Birdman?
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
I really don't think, I think that Ray would have loved Birdman. But
that was a fantastic
I don't think
movie.
he would have liked, what was the other one? Shortcuts.
Yeah.
That much.
Shortcuts was, it was difficult to, I think the audio on the movie was strange because that's just Robert Altman's style. He mics up everybody in the background, and so you hear, the clinking of the silverware and everything else. But it was, I still enjoyed the film. I love Robert Altman movies.
I like the film, but the reason that I don't is because they made up a lot of stuff. They adulterated. Is one artist making the version of how he sees his own things. That's what I mean.
Right.
Altman is seeing it. Hey, this is the way I see it. You know?
And he's pretty opinionated. Altman is. I mean, he has a vision. Very specific vision. So Ray Carver, Tess Gallagher, when did you meet those two?
Well, Tess, when she was a teenager still and going to the University of Washington, I was a waiter at this Mexican restaurant called Campos, the first Mexican restaurant in Seattle. And she would come and say, Alfredo, I only have $2. Can you just give me a couple of tortillas and some beans? And I will bring him the deluxe platter with all these extras, So we became really good friends. And she will visit me at a boarding house called the Magic Mountain. And we became really good friends. And then she disappeared for a while. And then when she came back in 77, I think, with Ray Carver, to introduce me to Ray Carver. And he walked in there in the house, and he immediately liked me because I was getting drunk and telling him all these stories, and he had a little notebook and he was writing all this stuff, and I was feeling so important that this guy cares that much about me,
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons that he wrote Menudo,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the short
I saw
story.
that in the book.
Yeah. It was really funny because Tess says, Ray is writing a short story about you. I said, oh my God, really? And I'm imagining he's going to talk about my paintings and all this stuff. And all of a sudden, he's writing about menudo,
Uh-huh.
And you know what menudo is?
Yeah, the soup.
Is a striped soup,
Right.
Beef tripe soup. But anyway, I call him up and I say, Ray, I got some of your draft. It's not Morelos, it's Morelia. And he goes, oh, okay, Alfredo, Morelia, okay. And then he calls back and I said, this is crazy. I just read your menudo recipe. You don't put vinegar on the menudo. That's horrible, Ray. And he says, oh, I said, where did you get that recipe? And he says, the library. I said, well, that's horrible. And then I call him back and he says, Alfredo, first of all, let me tell you something. This is fiction.
Oh.
There was my ego trying to correct his fiction,
Yeah. Did you, at the time that you were hanging out with Ray and Tess Gallagher, by the way, for those who haven't read her work, she's an incredible poet, very influential poet and writer. But when you were hanging out with Tess and Ray, did you know at the time that they were going to be so impactful in the in the world of writing?
Well, it was not hard to guess that they were, because Ray had already received that big award for $300,000. I think it was a MacArthur award.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's when his best buddy died in a motorcycle accident, and he went over and bought himself a Mercedes-Benz on his lippers, and they thought he was crazy. He wanted to pay cash for it. But anyway, that's what I have been so fortunate as a painter, because what happened to convince the public about how to digest abstract art, they had to have these wonderful writers, And so I thought, I need some great writers. And there was Tess Gallagher and Ray Carver, and so Tess wrote that book about, when she wrote about my book, it made it into a treasure, it won an award and stuff. And since then, I've been meeting a lot of Latino poets, Black poets, all Native American poets, and I go and listen to them and stuff. And when my grandfather, as a child, took me to see if they will accept me in the School of Fine Arts of Morelia, and they said, he's just a kid. We have professional artists over here. And my grandfather, but he has a lot of talent. And so they let me in there for 1 year. And it was the most fantastic experience, and because I could go into the poetry room, I could go into the dance room. It was a big colonial building, and the dances were fantastic. I mean, it was a world of fantasy. And so the idea of poetry already, one of the reasons that I didn't become a poet was because all of a sudden I ran to my mother and I said, as an assignment, they want the kids to recite a poem in the yard in front of the whole school. So I want to do this poem called the one of Francis of Assisi's, the one about the wolf. And it was like 10 pages, long. And I memorized every single line and recited to my mom. And she said, "You got it really good." So I walk into the middle of the thing petrified, and all the school is around me. And I start reciting my poem, but it was so long that the band started playing and took the whole people out. They all followed the band out and left me standing there.
You're still reading
So
it.
that's why I never became a poet, but I love poetry.
Yeah. Well, what a poet to be friends with, and what a tribute she made for you. And I mean, the poems and the writings in that new book that Tess contributed, it just it brought tears to my eyes because it shows what real friendship is, and I think that's hard to find. I think people are, I don't know, maybe it's just I'm projecting my own struggles with trying to cultivate and maintain friendships over the years. But what a bond you guys had and still have.
Yes.
To have someone like Tess write such beautiful things about you and tribute to you for that book. I'd like to, before we leave this room, I'd like to know if you have a philosophy or an approach to when you're done with a painting.
Yeah, that's always has been the most difficult question for artists, because sometimes I finish the painting and I put it away, and all of a sudden, 3 months later, I'm working back on it. And it's because it's a continuum. It's not something like you say, this is how it starts and how it ends. This is, do you have enough courage to start the journey and go on it and go on it, and they always say that the voyage is more important than the destination, And so I could keep on working. Sometimes if you could overdo your work and become stale if you just obsess with something, but it's just sort of like a song, It gets to a point and a repetition and everything else, and then it ends up with it that leaves you still with the music inside. And that's one of the things that I like to do with my paintings, is that the continuum is the connection to the viewers that are seeing them, because then the painting is moving in another direction, which is what I aim to do. That's what true art is. You want to play the song again and again, and because it's fading away, But there are things that are indelible in your life, and my playing Tarzan in the mountains of Mexico was one of the most beautiful things, because I had a lot of struggles growing up, as a kid, real sad childhood, and being in the forest, and that's now what I do. Every day I walk, go take pictures out of the beautiful animals and fauna at the lake and every place. I visit all these parks. So when I come to my studio, here I am with all that inspiration. And I don't dare turn the TV on until I'm done for the day.
So maybe we could go back upstairs and then talk about your childhood, because you mentioned growing up in Morelia.
Well, you're gonna have the whole history of my life in here.
Yeah, well, it's
It'll be very useful because most people, this is the way I like to be interviewed because it's spontaneous. It's a chunk of the artist rather than mechanical questions that you have to answer to them.
Right, yeah. And it doesn't have to be a chronological history, starting when you're born and ending at the Smithsonian or ending here in your home. It can be nonlinear, and that's just the way I think we process information anyway. Mm-hmm. We don't think linearly. Yes. But you were born in Morelia.
I was born in Morelia illegally. I'm illegal in every sense of the world and every aspect of my life. I have been illegal.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I was. I didn't have a father. I grew up with my grandmother and my mother because my mother had an affair with this incredible man that was 6 foot tall with blue eyes in Mexico and rode a motorcycle into the bull rings, and people used to make songs about him and marry a movie star in Mexico. And so all the women were crazy for this man, and my mom was one of them. And that's how I was born, without a father. And my grandmother took care of me. She actually, I consider her more my mother. But I accepted that my father, they even made a story that he died in the Second World War or something like that. And when my mother remarried, when I was probably around 11 years old, she married this horrible man that had I have three brothers and a sister from him, but he left my mother. But one of the things that happened that changed my life was that my grandfather had left me a 45 revolver, all decorated from the Revolution. And I had a little bullet inside of it that was 38, but this was a 44 caliber. So when I will shoot it, the whole bullet will come out, and it, of course, didn't work.
Right.
Because it wasn't the right caliber. But this time I was with a friend of mine doing my homework, and my half-brothers came running in to bother us, and he pulled the gun out and said, "I'm going to shoot you." And he pulled the trigger, and it worked. It went right through his head, And so my mother said, you gotta leave because he's going to kill you. He's just going to... He was a guy that wanted to try to play for the Olympics, lifting weights and throwing the disc. He had muscles everywhere, He was a horrible guy. And anyway, so the next day I was riding on the main street of Morelia in my bicycle, and I look at my little mirror, and behind I saw there was my stepfather with his truck, and he lunged at me, and I rolled over, and he ran all over my bicycle, and then he tried to chase me, but I was much faster, I ran away. And that's when I decided to move to Mexico City.
And how old were you then?
I was 13. And when I got to Mexico City, my aunt says, we found a school for orphans in Veracruz where you could go to for high school, and you'll be okay over there, but it's cold. And I said, well, okay. So I was ready to go. And then she came over the next day and she said, "You know what? I call your father." And I said, "My father?" she said, yeah, he's very wealthy and he lives here, and I call him up and he's coming over to see you.
Your biological
Tomorrow.
father.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he showed up in a big Cadillac, and I got into his car with my aunt, and he says, well, I don't know if he's my son or not, but I'm going to help him, you know. And so he started helping me by putting me in a school in Mexico City. And so I was in a lot of houses for students and things like that, boarding houses. And then about the third year, she said, he said, well, I convinced my wife for you to move in with us. And man, I was in heaven. There is this big mansion with a swimming pool and 3 beautiful sisters and a little brother. And I'm in heaven and I'm going to school.
This is like the late 40s, early 50s.
Yeah.
Because you were born in 35,
50s,
right?
Yeah. And he said, then my father bought me one of those Harley Davidson motorcycles that I could hardly lift. It was 500 pounds. Every time he lift, my friends would help me lift it up again, you know. And I was in heaven. But then my older sister got the idea that she was madly in love with me. And all of a sudden I said, oh, no, this is not right. And she will, you know, then she got so close to me that the other sisters started thinking that jealous of him because I would go to the movies and stuff and they didn't want to come. And they told, finally one night my father showed up in the middle of the night with a rifle and broke the door where I was sleeping and said, I'm going to kill you. You rape your sister and all this stuff. And they threw me out of the house. And I said, what? You know, and it was horrible, you know, because then I went back to the boarding houses and everything else. And then he came over one time and he said to me, when I left my house, I was 14 and now you're 17 or so, or 18. I'm going to give you some money so you could start a business and you could be independent from us. And so he gave me all this money, and I was looking around for some business to get into, and everybody said, you don't know anything about that, and you don't know anything about that. And then I bought myself a convertible and went to Acapulco and blew out all the money.
Oh, of course you did.
He said that he cried, and I said, but Dad, that money that you gave me was, I bought this convertible where I met this American family and I took it around Mexico, and they are the ones that took me to the United States. So you got rid of me really for good, you know, with that investment. It wasn't all thrown away, you know?
Well, I think sometimes money can hold you back too, because then it takes away that, you know, that drive to do what you need to do, you know, whatever your calling is. If you're too comfortable, you know, you're not going to have that drive.
Yeah, that's true. And well, that was a sad thing, because when I will visit him in Mexico the last years, he will sit down in this chair, and I said, what's going on, Dad? You look so sad. And he said, yeah, I really feel horrible. He says, Alfredo, I gave a house to each one of my children. I gave them trips to Europe, and I gave them money for businesses. And to you, I didn't give you anything. I said, no, 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 no. Dad, you gave me what I wanted. You gave me your love that to me has always been the most important thing. That's one of the reasons I quit drinking, because the angst that I have and the hate that I have and the bitterness that I have, I mean, I had a horrible time in the army being discriminated, and then my father, no connection with him, and when he threw me out of that house, and so I became a real famous drunk, And one time I was at the Blue Moon Tavern, somebody said, "You're in the newspaper." I said, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah. Here's the article." And it was a little blurb that said, "Alfredo Arreguin is not only a famous drunk, but he also paints. He just won an award at the Bellevue Art Museum show."
A famous drunk who happens to paint.
But he happens to be a painter too.
So when did you decide to stop drinking?
Well, after when I actually met Susie, my wife, at the Blue Moon Tavern, and I said to her, "Oh, you're gonna be my wife. You're my darling." And everybody said, "Yeah, right." I said, "She's going with me tonight," and everybody said, "Yeah, right." And so she did, and so we ended up together. But she had to go to Europe with a friend, and I kept on writing her when she was in Paris and everything else. And then I managed to gather all this money to rent a house that in those days were really expensive. $175 a month, with 1 month for before when you get the lease or whatever. So I gather all the money to when she would come back, she will move in with me, and so she did, and so we.
So when did you meet her?
That was it must have been about 1974, something like that.
So you were still drinking then?
Yeah, I was really drinking, and then I will go to Blue Moon and bring the party to my house. So everybody, "Party at Alfredo, party at Alfredo." So everybody will end up in my house partying, and one day this guy tried to get into my daughter's room, and I said, "That's it. I'm not gonna have a daughter with a drunk father. I'm gonna quit drinking and smoking." And Susie said, "Both?" I said, "Yeah, both. because they were scaring me that it was dangerous for me to smoke 2 packs of cigarettes in front of all this turpentine and all this smoking in front of all these paintings and stuff, that had all that odors. So one time Susie said that she got at 3:00 in the morning, I was sitting with 3 packs of cigarettes in my hand, and the ashtray was full of butts, trying to make up for a week that I hadn't smoked, So I said, I have to quit drinking before I quit smoking, because once I'm drinking, who cares if I die? I don't care.
Right.
And so I quit drinking, and then the hardest thing was to quit smoking, because it's so addictive. But I did it, and I think that is what I am so prolific with my paintings, because all that energy that I used to spend in taverns and doing all that stuff has converted into creative energy. So
now your wife is Susan Lytle?
Yes.
And so she's an artist as well.
She's an artist, yeah. We share the same studio downstairs.
And when she was in Paris, was she painting over in Paris at that time?
No, they actually were invited by this friend of the other girl to go there. He was very wealthy, and gave them money to go to Paris, and the other woman had never been there, so she asked Susie if she could go with her.
Right.
And I said, "Oh man, I'm gonna lose her," but I kept on writing, and eventually we got together, and we got married at this. Susie's sister was a lawyer that participated in that film that I guess was made in Harvard called The Shooting of Big Man, that they used for education purposes about that shooting in Yesler Tavern and the Yesler building over here. And she married this guy that was the head of the lawyers, the public defenders.
Mm-hmm.
So they bought this big, beautiful mansion-like old house, and that's where we got married by a judge that was their neighbors.
Yeah. And your daughter, is she an artist as well?
She's also an artist and a dancer. She was a belly dancer, and then she became more modernistic dancing. And now she's totally immersed in her garden. She's doing gardening, and she's interested in plants. And she got married to this Mexican guy that came here like I did. Some family supported him to come over, and he decided to stay too because he had problems with his family in Mexico.
Yeah.
So, it's really nice that we have him real close to our home, and they visit and stuff like that.
So you have managed, it sounds like, to be painting and making a living at art, making art for a very, very long time.
Which is very lucky, yeah.
And so what year did you start painting in a way that you were actually able to make a living at it?
Well, I went to university and got a master's degree in 1969. And after that, I started having shows right away at Poly Freelander and all these places. And I was also doing teaching like for the Parks Department and Queen Anne. And then when I didn't have any jobs, I was getting workers' relief for a few weeks. And then they started with this CITA program that had to do with granting artists money for their survival. And I applied to that and got a couple of those. And then I applied for the National Endowment for the Arts, which people say you'll never get it. You don't even know how to write a proposal or something like that. And I got it twice, National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship. And then they discovered me, and there was a man called David Schaff, a curator in Washington, D.C., and an art critic. And he asked the Mexican Museum to send them slides because he wanted to choose a Mexican American to represent the United States in the Cagnes-sur-Mer International Festival of Painting in Cagnes-sur-Mer, France. And he chose me as be the third, two Americans and me, to represent the United States. And I won the Palm of the People Award. And so that he connected me with the law firm that was defending Nixon. And they loved my work on their brand new multi-million-dollar building in Washington. And they bought like 6 of my paintings for the building, you know. So I started making, we didn't need that much money to survive. We never have had really big things except buying paint and paying the rent and whatever. And then I started selling, and I was represented by several galleries, Polly Freelander, Foster White Gallery, and I started selling work. So since then, I have been very safe. When the thing that happened was when we save all this money. I saved like $40,000 to buy a house, and they showed me this house here, and I loved it. Susie didn't like it because everything was painted green. This was Mr. Picardo's house, the man that started the Picardo Farms across the street and that donated to the city and all of that. And he lived in this house. So I always tell my Mexican friends, I live in the house of the boss. But anyway, I had this horrible insomnia thinking, what if I don't sell my paintings for a month or two? What? They're going to take our house. I was all worried about it. So when the Smithsonian bought my painting, the National Museum of American Art, they sent me the check, and I said, Susie, let's go to the bank and pay for the house. And we were the happiest. We're celebrating that now we own the house now,
Oh, great. So the Smithsonian, when they accept one of your paintings, they actually pay for it. You don't have to donate it to the museum.
No, there's both. Of course, everybody would like to be part of the collection of the Smithsonian, so a lot of people offer their work, but the National Museum of American Art purchased the painting, and the National Portrait Gallery, I donated the painting. Yeah.
So how much of your time is spent doing art? The process of thinking about the painting versus the business of art and the hustle I would imagine that artists have to go through to sell their paintings and make a living. Have you thought about that? How much time you have to spend doing probably the less desirable aspect of the art world, which is the business part?
Well, the painting is the easiest part and also the most natural part. That's what you do. The other stuff I've been helped because now I have a gallery that represents me, that gives me a show every 2 years. And so I get all the publicity and all that stuff. And she sells my work.
Which gallery is this?
It's Linda Hodges Gallery.
Oh, okay.
They've been established. They actually moved into a gallery that I was already in from these people that decided to open a gallery in Seattle from Mexico City. And they didn't take care of business. They were giving tours to all the governors and politicians to Mexico and abandoned the gallery, and they went broke. So then Polly Freelander moved into that same space. I've been with her for a few years now. And then I have a lot of shows, and I'm on Facebook. Once in a while, I sell work through Facebook.
Oh, nice.
There are people interested in the nicest thing about Facebook is that I get teachers from all over the world teaching my art to their kids. So they call me up and, when are you going to finish the painting? The kids are waiting, and I get invited to high schools now want to do reproductions of my art for their schools and elementary schools. I just went to elementary school where my daughter went to Bryant Elementary School, and the teacher said, we're studying your painting that is at the Smithsonian, and could you come and talk to the students? And I said, oh, okay, I'll come. And she said, and so I prepare myself with my I got all my paintings to show the kids, and they had the projector in the library. And when the students came, there were these little creatures, tiny little ones. Hello, and I'm going, what am I gonna do? And I'm telling them about my ghosts and the paintings and how I love animals and how my dog died and now the crows follow me around the park. And at the end of the session, the teacher said, do you have any questions? And the little boy gets up. Can you teach us how to paint ghosts, Mr. Arlequin? And then the little girl, what did your doggy die of? But anyway, it's been really wonderful to be able to connect with young people, and then old people like me. They come to my shows, and especially at museum shows, and I have my paintings in hospitals and retirement homes and things to inspire people.
Yeah.
And it makes me really happy that that art is not a way to be famous and rich, but it's a way to connect not only through your paintings, but spiritually. You make connections with people and real good friends.
Yeah. So the what does a day in the life of Alfredo Arreguin look like when you're painting? And like just starting when you get up in the morning and what your routine is and how much time you actually spend painting.
Well, I'm running out of not creative energy, but energy in general. I walk in the morning. Every morning I get up at, I wake up around 5:30 or 6. And then I come down and then we have breakfast and then I go to the park. And I take my camera. I used to take my dog with me. Now I just take my camera and take pictures and enjoy the day, the morning. And then I come home and I paint until 4 or 5. And then I go to bed. I have to take care of a lot of business. So a couple of hours at night, I do a lot of the things that have to do with interviews, and I have to plan for another exhibition and when are they meeting me, and there are people interested in Europe and my images to do jigsaw puzzles. So now my jigsaw puzzles are being distributed all over Europe.
Oh yeah. I mean, looking at your paintings, it makes a lot of sense that they would want to do jigsaw puzzles because they're very geometric. And as I've read about your work, sort of the convergence of math and art, with those patterns.
And then they just told me that now they just bought one of my designs in Turkey for a jigsaw puzzle. And the United States just published one of my jigsaw. They've got the idea that it's called pomegranate cards, that they're going to do a puzzle, and they want me to use one of my Fridas. So now they just published one of my Fridas that is selling like hotcakes around the United States. And what happens is that even in education, when you go get educated and then you get a graduate degree, you have all these barriers and taboos that have to do, you cannot be commercial, you cannot do T-shirts, or you cannot do jigsaw puzzles, or you cannot do posters, or you cannot do, and they don't understand that this is the old way to think about things, and you have to evolve.
Yeah.
And there are older people that are stepping into the future with all their stuff that they have learned to pass it on, and then it gets translated into different mediums and new ideas that young people start picking up on it.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons that I don't care. I really rejoice the fact that somebody in Poland or in Switzerland is doing my jigsaw puzzle,
Well, it's being seen. I mean,
that's right.
Your work is being seen by people who probably would not be seeing it otherwise.
Right.
So that's great. And I know what you're talking about, though. That there's sort of an elitism about frowning upon selling out. Whether it's a book being made into a movie, or a painting being made into a jigsaw puzzle. I could see the artists that want to hold on to the old school way of thinking, that they would look down upon that. But I think it's great that you're getting it into other mediums. That's awesome.
You can just imagine how I think that Frida Kahlo would have been very happy with their image being all around the world,
Well, what's your connection to Frida Kahlo?
Well, it's just that I never met her. She was the age of my father, was born in the same year, 1906. But I connect to her because of my mother wanted to be an artist. My mother suffered a lot, and she had a horrible life, not making it because of all these chauvinistic situations in Mexico, into which women were always the household. You don't even have a chance to get out there. I mean, my father married this movie star, and she ended up divorcing her because she wanted to pursue her career as a movie star, and he didn't like that she imagined that she was going to sleep with all these other people and didn't want her to be in that kind of business, but she decided that she wanted her freedom and left him, They broke up. But that's my connection to Frida. Also, I always wanted to have a woman that was a mestiza, which she was.
What do you mean by that?
Mestiza between being half German and half Mexican. And that's what mostly Mexicans are now. They're mestizos because Cortés and La Malinche had the first baby together. So she's the modern mother of Mexico, The union between a white and an Indian is a mestizo.
Okay.
And so she represents Mexico, but she also represents the European part that Mexicans don't like to recognize in one way, but want to presume that they are. They're always fighting themselves. Look how white I am, and yet I hate them,
Yeah, because she shows up a lot in your paintings, and they're all unique and different. But it's sort of a majestic. It's a majestic muse to have.
It's the feminine idea of that exists everywhere in nature. The jungle and Mother Nature is feminine, So that's one of the reasons that I wanted sort of a symbol of that, because when you endure a hard life, because of what the system assumes you are, and not give you the proper rights as everybody else, out of that pain and struggle comes beautiful art, beautiful expression, and beautiful music and songs.
Yeah, that's why I think so many artists, if you examine their lives, you see a lot of trauma from their childhood, pain, and suffering, and out of that comes an expression of that suffering through their art that is beautiful,
Yeah,
somehow.
it filters through.
Yeah.
And that's what you were talking about before, about the idea that when you give everything to your kids, and when you assume that they are your friends rather than you, the authorities, then you're in real trouble.
Right.
And they are in real trouble because they eventually are going to blame you for it instead of thanking you. Yeah. They create a resentment,
Yeah.
And
Vito de la Cruz, who you know and introduced us, one of his wife's sayings, Nati, she says, "It's not my job to make my kid's life easy."
Yeah.
So Vito tells him, when I talk about raising my kids, he brings that up, once every few months. But it's a good way to approach parenting, I think.
Yeah, it is really a delicate situation because like they might have a crazy idea of what they want to be, but you have to let them try it.
Yeah.
You cannot say, "Oh, you cannot be an artist or a musician." We come from people that are engineers or business people or something. It's ridiculous. If you don't feel it, you become slave or something that you think naturally is not you. And you're not going to have a good life having to go to work.
So what advice would you give to young people who maybe have a calling? They feel like maybe a career in the arts is for them, but their parents are pretty rigid with what their expectations are vocationally. You're going to go to college. You're going to get a real job. What advice would you have for young people facing that dilemma?
Well, if a lot of kids very early appear to have already something that they're passionate about. But other kids, I didn't for a long time. And until I discover art. But don't become an artist because you think you're going to be famous and because you think that you're going to make money. And don't be an educator if you don't have a passion to be patient with the kids you're going to teach. If you have that passion, then the other stuff is a periphery of that. And like if you have a passion for painting or music or something, the money will come to you when you start doing great stuff. But if you're searching the money around what you think that your profession is going to give you, and you're disappointed, you blame the art, not yourself, for making a bad choice about what to expect.
So it sounds like you start with the passion, and then you focus on the craft, and then if you focus enough on the craft and you get good enough, that everything else will flow from that organically.
Yeah, well, there's a point in your life into which art is not like a profession, but it's you. You go outside and your eyes are directing you to things that are interesting. It's not like you are going to look for a bird. It's that the bird appears to you. And music, you can learn technique. You can learn you can go to the best schools and learn all the technique about painting. If you don't have the other part, which is the most important part, then you become a good designer for commercial art probably will be great. But if you want to suffer somehow and filter all that suffering and express it with art, then you're going to see that there's a lot of beauty and that comes out of all that pain, it filters through. And that's one of the reasons that I could quit smoking and drinking, is because the spiritual part of it was always there. I didn't need the drinking and the smoking dope or drugs. It's always there. It's just that you don't know how to access it because your brain is always doing stuff to you. It's worrying you, it's making you feel this way or the other way. So you have to quiet your brain. That's what Picasso said. It will be great to paint without a head, And
there's a lot of noise in their head.
Yeah. Or like the Buddhist thing, that you have to pacify the monkeys, The monkeys in your brain are always fooling around with you. And it's not much to as when you give advice, it's something so much more direct, but friendshipness, kindness, the closeness to things that are not ego-oriented will give you the ability to reach your soul and begin to express yourself in beautiful ways, because that's where the source of everything comes from. That's beautiful. All the simple things that are important and beautiful in life are not the other stuff that we think that gets old in a week. You get a brand new car and it's over in a week or two. You start putting mud in it and stuff. But the other stuff is always there. And so when you meet a friend, it's an aura of feeling so good because it takes you to times that were wonderful. And it's not like when I'm start thinking about next time I'm going to do a painting of salmon, I'm not thinking of painting the last painting, but I'm already thinking of new ideas that were impregnated through me by visiting all these places, seeing more art, even looking at the internet at designs from Japanese rugs or things like that. They all become part of you, but not in a conscious way. Yeah. If you try to imagine it and draw, you can't. But if you relax and you allow that to come through you, you are amazed. That's what magic is all about. Right. It transcends from the inside of you and with your hand into something, and it blows your mind.
Yeah, and it's even though it was
so natural.
And it sounds like even though you're looking at something. You're not copying, you're not plagiarizing, but you're being inspired and you're creating something completely original through observing, the beauty around you. And you just have to be ready to really see look for and see the beauty around you and have it, filter through your own lens.
And it's basically, this is what I think. Basically, what happens is that when you're a child, everything is so incredibly intense and miraculous. The marbles trigger you to look through worlds. You see these little bubbles, the water, the imagination, the richness of colors, the scene of people dancing and gesturing, and all this stuff is so fantastic. And then the kids start going to school and learning that, no, you made a mistake. That's not a salmon, that's a carp. And no, this is this and that. So the brain takes over about, oh, I made a mistake. That wasn't, instead of seeing the fish as a fish. And that's one of the things that I started doing at first when I was painting. I was putting tigers in Latin America and kangaroos in Africa and whatever, because it was the kid's expression. When a kid draws, he's not drawing accuracy or data or anything else. It's coming to where I used to try to come all the time, where that inspiration comes from. It comes directly to them because they don't have all that other stuff that we built through the years that locks us up into little cells of things.
Right.
You know?
The baggage of...
I was right about that, and you were wrong about that, and you get mad about this. And it's so silly, you know.
It's the labels and compartments and the rules that sounds like that kind of corrupt us as adults and make us less tuned into art.
And then you create fear because these images are in your brain. Like when I see those Mexicans sleeping on a cactus with a sombrero, they're lazy people. I don't want to hire them because all they do is take siestas, you know. These are the hardest working people in the world. My God, they got 2-3 jobs every day, you know. And so, you know, so it takes all. I used to love to give all these tours to these at the Albuquerque Museum. I had all this board of trustees, all these business people that came over, and they all had these faces of, what am I doing here? And whatever, you know. And I start talking to them and talking about the paintings, and we're moving around. And pretty soon they're smiling and they're laughing, and I'm gotten to them. They're becoming children again. Now I can play with them. Now we can play together.
Yeah.
Because now you left all that suit of inhibitions and all this stuff at the door, and now you're coming to play, you know. So it's a real wonderful situation that we are so much, the whole people of the whole world, we're so united and by our genes and ourselves and where we came from primitive years to now. But we have made ourselves different by differentiating each other. And then all of a sudden we're creating conflict because there are enemies, you know. And I went to Portugal, and I don't know Portuguese, and I had all these conversations with people. I could understand part of it, and part of it with our actions, we're having fun and laughing. We're children again. You take those veils, you know, and you approach people as friends rather than, I am this and what are the directions of that, and they resent you because you don't respect them, all this stuff, you know. And I love to travel because I go and sit down when I was in Korea, I was out there eating horrible dog food sandwiches with the natives up in the mountains. And it was beautiful. They were out there playing this wonderful music, and it is a beautiful country, all the mountains, and they're all having these picnics, and they have all these little wrappings of delicious food, except for the dog meat, you know. But I ate it and tasted it and everything, so I didn't want to offend them, you know.
Well, Alfredo, do you think we covered everything you wanted to talk about today?
You probably have Encyclopedia Britannica to fill up with all this stuff.
Well, I'm sure, with as much work as you've done and the life that you've lived, that we probably just scratched the surface. But I want to thank you for sitting down with me in your home and having me in your home today. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you so much, Brian. I really appreciate it. I right away when you walk in the door, I knew you were going to be my friend. So I felt real relaxed to talk to you, and things, it's just like having coffee with a friend. I love to chat like that,
Yeah, sharing your life in this way was a real privilege to hear. And I'm sure our listeners are going to appreciate all the time that you spent to share your story. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Dreampath podcast. If so, I have a favor to ask. Can you go to your favorite podcast service and give me a rating and review? Your feedback is what keeps this podcast going. I appreciate your time, and as always, go find your dream path.